That's one of the reasons why we've made such an effort to ensure that our team members align with our brand ethos. They have to live and breathe our mission and brand ethos in everything they do.
And how do you do that? How do you find out? Welcome, guys, to the podcast. Thanks for taking your time out of your busy days and travels to make it in. I just wanted to start off, if Alie, we'll start with you. Introduce yourself, kind of tell us about your background. And
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here, Anthony. Thank you so much. I'm Alie Gaffan. I am the Senior Vice President of People and Culture for Pacifica Hotels. Been in the hospitality industry for more than 30 years, the majority of that time with Pacifica, which I know is very unusual nowadays. But when people ask me, why and how have you stayed with one company for so long, I would say it's primarily because I've had the opportunity to grow and learn along the way. So I've worn a million different hats, started out as a server in one of our restaurants, and was able to grow into managerial level positions, director level positions.
Cool.
Everything you can think of, worn a ton of hats. And here I am today. I have the opportunity to oversee people services and training and development in particular for our whole company. And to have a seat at the table as an executive.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now, was that your plan when you started out as a server? Did
No.
you see yourself in this role? No?
Not at all.
Okay.
Actually, the truth of the matter is that I was an unemployed actress at the time, and I needed to pay my rent. So I got a job as a server, and it wasn't easy because I was applying for jobs as servers thinking that's what unemployed actors do, and nobody would hire me. So I walked into a then 42-room Best Western hotel in Marina del Rey, and they gave me the opportunity to be a server without any experience whatsoever, just based on, attitude and willingness to learn.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
And then I think it's testament to the company too that they could see your progression or the potential and kept you moving up. And,
Well, I would say you do have to have that fire from within and the motivation to continue to challenge yourself.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
But when you can, work with people that can see that and help, pull that out of you a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a pretty magical thing.
No, that'd be good to get into too.
Yeah.
But I've got a lot of thoughts on that. But yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Curt, so we actually met through Alie.
Yes.
She introduced us, but give us a little background on who you are and what you do.
Yes. Well, first of all, I'm glad to be here with Alie. Thank you for inviting us to participate in this. My story is not much different than Allie's. Different slight path. I was not an unemployed actor. I was a young husband, and I've been in the service industry for 40 plus years. Started when I was 16 years of age at a chain that you might be familiar with here in the Southern California region, Jack in the Box restaurants.
Oh, yeah.
So I worked there for, hoped to have been the first 50-year employee. That didn't quite work out, but that was okay. But did the same thing, same path. Started as the maintenance boy, moved up through the ranks, shift leader, assistant manager. The blessing, how I got into what I do today, is because the prep girl that I met, who eventually became my wife of 43 years, is a superstar performer. So she was always like 2 steps ahead of me. So I'm like, I'm going to have to find an alternative path here in this organization if I want to grow, and just happened to make my way into the L&D space. So spent about, of my 30-year career at Jack, I spent about 20 in the L&D space. And then when it was time to move on due to circumstances around franchising, one of the areas that Alie and I know each other from is the Council of Hotel and Restaurant Trainers. And so I had collaborated, had been on the board, and the person that I work with today was a past president when I was on the board. And so we connected with that. So for the last 14-ish or so years, I've been working at People and Performance Strategies as a partner consultant, working with organizations like Allie's and many other in the hospitality and outside of the hospitality, Zaller Law Group being one of them, and just helping them navigate the world of being with other human beings, because it is a fun space to be, but it can present some challenges at times, and there's ways to navigate through that. So that's what I've been doing, and it actually is my it gives me a happy place because I know that there's a difference being made in one-on-one connection. So I enjoy it.
That's great.
Yeah.
So if you can give us a little more details on that, how can you help organizations through that process, and what tools do you have to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, it all begins with self-awareness, right? And I've learned this after 43 years of marriage. I didn't always have a good awareness around how I was landing with my significant other. And through the work that I do now, we've come to a better place. So we work with really industry-leading tools to help people with building their own self-awareness, one of which is the Everything Disc suite of products. That starts with who you are and how you impact others. We have other products like sales and management and leadership programs. We also work with a tool called 5 Behaviors, which is an adaptation, working very closely with Patrick Lencioni on his 5 Dysfunctions. He always advocates using some behavioral assessment in his work. And we have taken that because he's part of the Wiley family now and adapted it with the DISC product. So we took a more I hope I don't get myself in trouble, proactive look, the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team versus the 5 dysfunctions. So it comes across as a little bit more positive way. But it all is about that same thing. It's building self-awareness. How do I show up at work? And then how do I impact others? And then ultimately, how do I adapt to those folks that are around me? Yeah.
And before my firm worked with you, I've heard about all these different assessments. But, for DISC, if you could, very high level view on that. And then I want to come back to Alie on the value you see with it as well. On how it's played out with your team. But kind of give us an overview. What is it, and how do teams use that to improve team performance?
Yeah. So DISC was an adaptation of a study that was done by Dr. William Marston way back. And you'll see his work in a lot of different products. So our product is one. There's many others that have taken his work and capitalized on it. In about the early 70s, it kind of got adopted to the business world. But in basic assessments, you have 4 different styles. Everything in the L&D world is in 4 quadrants. We just love 4 quadrants, right? We just keeps it easy for us. So you have the D or dominance quadrant, you have the I influence quadrant, the C conscientious, and I should go S, supportiveness, and then C is conscientiousness. There are 12 total. So for example, my style is a CD style. So I'm conscientious dominance. What's your style, Alie?
I am a high I.
She's an I style, very high. And each one has some behavioral traits that go along with it. So a D dominant style tends to be very direct, to the point, a little bit more of a solo worker, likes to get things done, very results oriented. I style, very collaborative, love people, want to be around people, and do work through and with other people. The S style, steadiness, very supportive individuals. These are folks that you can rely on. They will be the type of person you can share your problems with, and they will gladly sit and listen to you. And then the C style, which I will tell you because that's my strength, is we're very detail-oriented, analytical. We want to have information. We want to have data. We don't do things off of emotion. Whereas an I style might lead with emotion, we lead with what I would call thought process. Give me a spreadsheet. Let me look at the data, and then I'll formulate my own opinion. And there's subsets. Like I said, I'm a CD style. So just give you a quick example. I learned this the other day, and how it plays out. And this will get to your second part. My CD style, if it's my idea, the D style comes out very strongly because it's a great idea. Okay. If it's your idea, my C style kicks in. I'm like, well, I'll be the decider on whether it's a great idea because I have 12 questions I'd like to ask before I'm ready to jump on. And where that helps organizations is like, there are times when my C style needs to step back and not just launch right into that. Let me sit and listen to your idea. Maybe go ahead and take a leap of faith and move forward with that idea without having to vet it through 1,000%, right? On the flip side, just because I threw my idea out there, I should probably look to my coworkers and my peers and my colleagues, like, what do you all think? And that's where it starts to help in the workplace, right? Because if I have an S-style member on my team and I don't ask for their opinion, they have one, but because I didn't ask, they're not going to share. So that's what I have to learn to do differently. And so, and you're a makeup of all 4 styles. You can pull on it. What I will tell, and I tell every client, so you may remember this, when you're in your highest point of stress, you then revert back to kind of that fight or flight, and you're going to go with that first natural instinct, which is where that C or D style might come out stronger. So that's what we want to help people recognize, kind of put the mirror up to their face a little bit to say, this is how you're showing up for others. What can you do differently?
Yep. Great. So Alie, how, we were talking about doing something like this, and you said, look, I've got this great person to use and do this. So how have you been using the DISC assessment, and how do you see it playing out within your organization?
Well, it's these types of like self-reflective studies that we've done. We've done a million times, lots of different products. We first introduced DISC, and that's when Curt's partner Jolene came out and facilitated at one of our company retreats, which involves our general managers, all of our directors of sales, our entire home office. We brought Jolene in and we introduced DISC as a different product in that it's not just one and done. And I think that, there are a lot of different great products out there, but we decided, this is not something that we're going to do during this conference and then we're going to move on and get back to business as the way we have always done things. In fact, the opposite, that we're going to take it and we're going to build momentum. We did, and then the pandemic happened, and it felt like we needed to hit the restart button. So we reintroduced DISC at a company retreat. And really the motivation, and Curt hit the nail on the head, it was in an effort to encourage all of our leaders and our home office team members, who are, some of them are it's all departments, it's accounting, it's marketing, it's sales, people from all different departments. But to encourage and instill in them that sense of self-awareness that's so important. Because during the pandemic, everybody kind of there were a lot of silos. People were nervous to be working directly with other people. We kind of had made so much progress, and then found ourselves in a position where we needed to relearn how to grow those social skills that give us the opportunity to build really meaningful relationships with people. We as a company wanted to do that, knowing that our people are our most important asset, really, at the end of the day. Without our people, no matter how beautiful all of our hotels, we really have nothing. So we need to take care of our people and give them an opportunity to better understand themselves and to learn how they can effectively communicate with others to build better relationships, to maybe be in a position of influence if we are trying to gain buy-in on a project or whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, doing all of this knowing that we are in the hospitality industry and we need to do even more to put ourselves out there to build relationships with each other as a team, to make sure that we're there to take care of our guests, because they're an incredible part of this as well. Our investors, it's every single person who makes a difference and has an interest in what we're doing. We want to improve those relationships so that we can continue to grow and get better together. Knowing the results will follow when we begin to work more collaboratively and are better at listening to other people's ideas.
And that's great in theory. Have you had any pushback? And I'll throw this question to both of you. Pushback from people that are just like, nah, I'm not buying into this. Like, this is a bunch of, just theory, and that doesn't describe me. I took the test, but I'm not a DI, or I thought it's something different. Have you had that pushback, or has the team been pretty open to it?
What's so interesting is, having had the opportunity to go through the process several times, being with Pacifica for as long as I have been, this most recent relaunch and refresh of this whole idea, really a larger initiative, because it involves everyone, and how we're going to continue to, trickle this down to our team members at the property level. It was easier than we would have expected, because we've hired people that are naturally aligned with our brand ethos, what we stand for, those characteristics that make us who we are. So a collaborative team, a gracious team, a team that is dynamic, has the ability to adapt, and a team that's driven, because we need to work towards those results in order to have a successful business and to continue to create those opportunities for our team to grow.
Yeah. Now, obviously, you're doing it at the executive and higher levels in the organization. Are you doing? How do you bring this into just the servers that are new? And do you do that? Do you think it's necessary?
Well, good question. And our team is made up of a very diverse group of individuals. There may be some that are maybe not inclined or comfortable to be a part of something that's as formal as the DISC assessment can be, and all of the material that's kind of behind it. Yeah. Whereas we still have the opportunity to facilitate discussions, knowing what we know, to help continue to educate our team members on what this could mean to them, even not having completed the assessment. That said, in terms of our process in rolling it out, we did start out at a company retreat. We took it the next level and facilitated workshops at the properties to involve other levels of the management team that weren't a part of that larger conference. And then we continue to kind of property by property introduce and in many cases actually facilitate the DISC assessment again with certain groups, and particularly front of house, where we are confident that they're going to be able to understand the materials and it's going to be, an interesting process for them. So we have figured out a unique way to involve everybody overall, with the understanding that it's going to be a bit of a process because we have to get to everybody. So we're kind of chipping away at it and keeping it alive. I think that's the most important thing. It continues to be a part of discussions, no matter what we're doing. If we're working on our business plans for the upcoming year, that at some point it's going to come into play. Maybe there will be an icebreaker activity that helps us to understand how we can better leverage each other as resources for support, whatever it might be. It's keeping it alive and continuing to make it a part of our discussion and who we are and how we operate.
And Anthony, I'd like to circle back on the maybe folks that push back a little bit. And it's interesting because it correlates with the DISC style. So I've often said, if I find out that the client that I'm working with is an IS, it's going to be the easiest sell I'll ever make, because they're about taking care of their people and they see the value and they see the benefit. If I come up against a C style or a D style, it's going to take a little bit more effort. And especially if they've used something like this in the past and maybe have not seen a payoff. But once we get them past that hurdle, the amount of curiosity that is generated, and I've done many a session recently, and I haven't even walked in the room to say my name, and they're already talking about it because they're now sharing with each other. That's where you get the groundwork laid, where people start to have those conversations. And then to Allie's point, we have to help keep those conversations going. As far as my existing clients, what we find is if we can get it down to the manager of people level, right? It's always great to start with the executive team because you got to get their support and their buy-in, their willingness to, just fundamentally pay for the stuff, but also be there supportive and recognizing their role in this. They're not off to the sideline just observing. They're actively engaged. What do their messaging sound like? And are they taking into consideration how that might land with their employees? But those managers of people, that GM at the property, that restaurant owner, restaurant manager, the project team lead, they need this information because then they can take it out there and spread it with their employees. What we're finding, that's the pain point right now in a lot of organizations, is the manager. And Alie mentioned things changed as a result of COVID, right? And we're realizing that there's a lot of people in positions of management who may not have gotten a ton of leadership training to this point because a lot of people retired or left the industry. And so we were forced to put some folks into positions. So they're struggling. I mean, they're feeling overwhelmed multiple times a week by, I don't know how I'm going to get all this stuff done. And it's up to them to kind of transition this stuff downwards. So we're trying to work on that particular component. But I will tell you, in the sessions that I've done, when I get to the manager level, they're soaking this stuff up. They're like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I wish I had that. I did one session where a person that level was not involved, but their boss went through it, and another coworker who was involved showed their boss's style, and the employee's like, how do I get that? I need this for me to be successful as an employee. And I'm like, all right, come on over here. So it's.
And For me, and I think this is important for leaders in organizations to recognize too. For me, for my firm, I'm involved with groups, boards. I'm in a business group. We have speakers come in, talk about these assessments. I participate in them. I was doing that, but then I come back to the firm and share some stories, and everybody here in the firm would be like, "Well, that's interesting.
Right.
Like, what's that about?" And you realize, look, as a leader, you're exposed to this, a lot of different learning and everything within. You're going outside of the organization, but with your in the organization, not getting exposed to it. And it's critical to have that training and thinking this through. And for me, and that's the word that's been coming up a lot. I've lost count, but even before we started recording, this is self-awareness.
Yes.
How you're showing up with others, how others are showing up to you, how they're going to receive the information. And, for me, that's been the key takeaway with the DISC assessment. But I wanted to get your take, like on a high level view. What are we really going for by doing these assessments for people to realize, and how does it help a team work better together?
Yeah. Well, when you think about it, whether it's interacting with your team members through a project, or if it's a guest service agent interacting with a guest who might be experiencing a challenge, which sometimes happens. I don't know why I looked at you. He's staying at
I'm
one
not
of
a
my
challenge.
hotels,
I'm the nicest guest ever.
But it feels good when you feel prepared and you have a sense of confidence and the ability to take a breath and to thoughtfully respond to what's happening versus being emotionally charged and reacting, like allowing your emotions to take over to the extent that you say something that you might regret. Yeah. So it's really about having the opportunity to continue to, to think it through. And I've grown up with my mom always telling me, think before you speak. So I've kind of grown up with that repeating in my brain. But it's true. It's every single one of us, especially if we are really passionate about what we're doing and we do really genuinely care. It's easy to find yourself kind of worked up. But if you can manage that and you can channel those emotions to a place where you then are able to recognize how you're inclined to respond, have the self-awareness to take a beat. Sometimes you're able to say, I might have thought I wanted to say something in response to that right away, but instead I'm going to ask a question so that I can better understand. So I can seek to understand and demonstrate to you that while maybe on the front end that could have potentially turned out to be a conflict, it won't. Because we're going to build an even stronger relationship because we have the respect to stop and to ask questions if we don't understand and to be willing and open to learn.
Yeah.
And that's why I like to partner with clients like Alie, who has assimilated this. She's role modeling. She's delivering it every day in her workspace so they see it, as opposed to me showing up, doing my thing, and then I go home, and I got to leave it to the folks that are on point. But what she said, I think, is the next phase for that self-awareness is it's the confidence. Okay, now I'm confident who I am. I know how I'm going to react. I know how I should deal with it. I know how I might not deal with it most productively. Can I take that moment and step back? And again, depending upon the heightened emotional impact of the situation, it'll take more effort to that. But even if it goes sideways, you always have a place to come back to say, you know what, I apologize for how I reacted. I realize that I got triggered in that moment. You can then open up that dialogue again versus avoiding that coworker or disgruntling that guest to the point where now it's an issue that leads to further things. And we'll hopefully get to KPIs here in a second, key performance, because I think a lot of things that happens with these types of programs is folks don't see, how does this benefit the brand? How does this, everybody's kumbaya, everybody feels good, but is it drawing any more sales? Are we improving profits? Do we reduce turnover and increase retention? So we want to make those connections. But what Alie said, I think, is the key takeaway is how can you be the best employee you can be so that the benefits to the organization are there? Because we all know that when we've had a bad day at work, it's not just at work. Then we walk out of work and then we have a bad day on our drive home. And I'm from the state of Washington. We don't have quite the traffic challenges that you all have here in Los Angeles. But if I'm upset about work, then that might lead to an interaction that I'll have on the way home.
Yeah.
Or then I get home and it leads to an interaction that I have with my family. So there's ripple effects to this that are helpful as well. But that confidence piece, I think, and we talk about it, and I stole this shamelessly from somebody else. We're trying to take the personal out of interpersonal, which seems kind of counterintuitive. But when it gets too personal, that's when things elevate and get into a sticky situation. And bless Alie for what she does. She hears a lot about these sticky situations. I don't have, because of my CD style, the empathy and understanding. I just want to get it solved. But you need that ability to step back and go, well, what's going on with you? What's going on with them? And having those conversations. If you don't know that about yourself, those sticky situations become even bigger challenges for you in the organization. So that's where I see the benefit. And Allie's approach to it is, getting it out there to the folks that matter. Not that means that the housekeeping staff doesn't matter, but guess what? The folks that lead those housekeeping people matter, and they're going to matter to those housekeepers. And that's where we see the value and the benefit.
And we were talking about it a little bit before we started. The higher up you are in the organizational structure too, this becomes even more critical. But it's not in terms of, the CEO, CMO, CFO is important, so they have to pay. It's almost they're serving everybody else in the organization first,
exactly,
and have to have this self-awareness to be able to do that.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And to genuinely believe it, because I'd be remiss if I didn't admit that over the many, many years in going through exercises like this, there have been points in time where someone didn't necessarily buy into it.
Right.
If you're not,
people can know.
They do
when you come across those people.
They do. If it's not authentic, if it's not genuine, it actually creates an adverse effect. So I feel super fortunate that we've got a leadership team, an executive team that absolutely does believe that those relationships are critically important. And I think one of the reasons too is, in business, we are so often talking about accountability and how to ensure that we're setting clear expectations, and we want to have great relationships with people, but if we really care about others, we are taking the time to make sure that they are doing things well and that they are achieving the results that we've set out to reach. So you have to have the ability to have difficult conversations with people without there being a personal response to it. And if you can build relationships like this with team members or with guests, when things do go sideways, you'll have a much easier time working through it. Things are going to go sideways from time to time. How we respond to the situation versus react is what makes the difference. And it is not easily done. We got to think about it. And we do have to adjust. Or maybe even, as Curt just alluded to, recognize those times where, oh my gosh, I spoke too quickly. I retract that. Give me a moment to think this through.
Or knowing that you're just inclined to do that from time to time. And you can preempt that and tell people, hey, I might just say this.
Bear with me.
Bear with me. And then
it's
they
a hot
know,
topic.
okay, that's,
It's true. If you can have that kind of conversation, though, and that type of relationship, then when things do get tough, you can still have success in managing through the situation and build even stronger relationships.
And it's interesting what Alie says about accountability, because if I'm talking to an operator or individual that's got financial, fiscal responsibilities, performance responsibilities, they lead with the accountability part. They're like, how can I help my people be more accountable? And I'm like, and this is where 5 dysfunctions, 5 behaviors comes in. Well, you might want to peel that onion back a little bit and like, what's causing that accountability challenge? Do you have a lack of trust on your team? That could be it.
Right.
Or to Allie's point, have you not had these productive, what we call productive conflict, where you've talked about this through? Or did you not get to that stage where we walked out of the room, we're all committed, but were you really committed? Maybe not. And once you get that foundation laid, the accountability part becomes a little easier. It's not totally easy. As Alie said, none of this stuff is a silver bullet. It still takes effort. But that's a symptom in my book. When I hear a client talking about that, I'm like, okay, you're talking accountability. I think we might want to go back a little bit more earlier on and how are y'all interacting with each other first, and then we'll move forward. And it's tough in our business because we have high turnover. So you're always starting with new team members all the time. So that makes it a little bit more dynamic.
For me too, that accountability and those tough conversations, the closer people are to me, the harder it is to have. Like opposing counsel, just lay into them. But, I have to hold back on that too, because that's not the best practice either. But it's easier to call somebody out that, it's almost like it's your job as an attorney. But there is some civility being brought back into the legal profession, and I strongly believe in that. And I think you can get further as an attorney by building the relationship, even with opposing counsel. And some of the more sophisticated clients recognize that. They're like, I see what you're up to. Versus kind of the old school way of thinking is like, oh, you're scorched earth. My attorney's this pit bull. But people can see through that, and guardrails go up when you approach people like that. So it's interesting how that comes through. But it's that those conversations are tough to have, and coaching people through that too, very tough.
And what you described is exactly your style coming into play in various different ways. I always tell the story, and Alie knows, I use my wife as an example. She's an IS style, and she would, when she was in operations, she would terminate employees who would give her a hug at the end. And I'm like, I don't even understand what that means. How does that happen? But because they know she has done all she can to help them get where they need to be. She's, shown them empathy. She's given them those tough conversations. She's given them the information they need to be successful. And they chose not to do the things that were needed. And she doesn't do it from this is what I need you to do. This is what you need to do to help you get where you need to be. If I have to terminate somebody, I have anxiety like you would not believe. I would prefer if I just went in my office and they just decided to leave. That would be the best case scenario. But I know I can't do that because that's not good for the business. That's not good for the employee. So it takes me more effort to have those conversations. So to your point, and if I really know and like that person and I have to give them some tough feedback, that's difficult, right? Now, if I'm a high, strong D style where the business is the most important thing, I don't find that very difficult to do. But the ramifications of how I deliver it could have big impact on the business. So that's the self-awareness that we're talking about and how it applies on a day-to-day basis. But it's a lift. It's not easy.
And you mentioned the KPIs, and to bring it back to Alie too, that how do you measure this? It seems so amorphous, difficult to measure, and the CFO comes in and be like, how much are we spending on this, and what's our return on that? Like, is there a KPI that we could look at as an organization, and how do you assess that?
Well, we conduct regular engagement surveys, which give us a pulse on how people feel about their job, their contribution to their job, whether or not they feel they make a difference within the company. And that's one way that we do it. So I think through feedback directly from our team members, through feedback from our guests. To your point, though, it's not as if you put a program like this in place and then you're like, okay, in 6 months, we'll look back and we'll see that we're exactly where we need to be. Because the reality of it is that when you're dealing with people, with humans, with emotions, it is a work in progress all of the time. So you can manage, and keep a pulse on that sentiment of your team, but you've got to continue to keep it up. So we do that through formal engagement surveys. We do that through roundtable discussions that we might have with our team members. We do look at some of those data points, though, too, to recognize it. We're hearing that everything is going well, yet the numbers are telling us differently. So what are we missing? So it is, I think that while we continue to make that effort to build those relationships, there are certainly times where when we see that things aren't, maybe our guest satisfaction scores aren't where they need to be. Maybe if the cleanliness scores aren't where they need to be, is there a story behind those numbers that we need to look into? And could it be attributed to the relationships amongst the team members that we have there? Or maybe the lack of conversations that are happening so that a manager doesn't know that, our room attendants have asked for new vacuum cleaners. Why haven't we gotten them for them? So it's really, it is a work in progress. Yeah. So it's not something that is like you get it, you check it off your list and you're done. Yeah. It really takes an effort, and you have to be willing to look in a little bit more deeply to see where you really stand. And it's interesting because I was planning to reach out to you on this, and I keep forgetting to do it, but I'm going to reach out to you.
We're doing it right now.
Right now, live. But the 360 evaluations as well, because to take it a step further, one of the next steps in our process and in an effort to continue to keep this momentum going is going to be the chance for us to facilitate some of these 360 evaluations where you get feedback from some key stakeholders in your world. That might be a line level team member. It might be the CFO for the company. It could be different things depending on the person who's involved, but continuing to challenge ourselves to be open to taking feedback and to continue to make improvements, because every little improvement that we make is beneficial. We want to hold ourselves to continuing to look to improve each and every day. We're never done getting better.
Yep. I like that. I like that.
Yeah, and we spend a lot of time talking with clients about, especially our L&D partners, right? Because L&D, and Alie mentioned it, she's in that role, so she's got a seat at the table. That has not been historically where L&D has sat. We tend to be a more reactive group. Somebody tells us we need this program, we run out and we do that program.
Right.
And if we launch it on time, that's our big coup de grace. It went great. And we're really getting into it. And this is where Chart comes in. We really try to tell people, okay, make sure the programs you're doing are having the impact that you intend them to do. Otherwise, it's going to be busy work for you, and it's not going to be productive for the company, and it's going to cost a lot of money. So really focus in on that. So the people metrics are always the best place to start, right? The engagement survey. We know that, a team that's engaged is going to perform at 18, and there's many a study that will tell you different ranges. The one I most recently got, 18% higher performance with an engaged team. A data point that I recently heard, $1.9 trillion is lost in the U.S. economy due to lack of productivity from disengaged teams. So that's a great place to start.
So when you say engagement survey, is it just a form you give to the team members, or what's that?
It can vary. I mean, we can get as deep, and we often use the Kirkpatrick model, which is the 4 levels of learning. And what it really boils down to is, tell us what your experience is. So it can be as broad-based as you want. A lot of organizations do pulse surveys, and they do it regularly just to see, how are we trending? How are we trending? Are people still engaged? And you have it's very short, because we also know we lack attention span in a lot of cases. So we can't have them do a 45-page engagement survey, because they're not going to get past the 3rd question. So the pulse surveys work out well there. And it's a way for leadership to keep an eye on, so it doesn't come up later on when the lawsuit's filed and we're like, didn't anybody know about this? It's like, well, we didn't, because we never asked. So we asked. You hear through some organizations, they exit interviews. We're a big advocate of stay interviews, which is part of engagement surveys. Tell us what's working, tell us what's not working before it becomes a problem and you leave. Because how many studies have been done around the cost of one employee, right? You've seen those numbers. It ranges. I had a CFO who said, it's just $700. I'm like, okay, I'll take $700. Other studies say it's, it can be upwards to $4,000 to $5,000, and the higher up you go, the more it is. Like, let's just start with $700. If we save $700, we pay for a lot of development for other employees. So starting there. But I want to see it taken to the next level, to what you said earlier, guest engagement scores. Here's when we implement it. We can't attest all of one event. It's a series of things that happen, but this is one component. And if I talk to my CFO or CEO and I'm like, so we went up 15% in guest engagement, how much would you say you could attribute to what we did at this? 5%. I'll take it, because that was meaning we moved the needle forward. So really getting into that. And it can go down to profit improvement, reducing waste, things along those lines. I'm a big fan of the frontline employee. I like to hear what they have to say, because they are unfiltered if you give them an opportunity. I was at a place buying something. I'm like, oh, I noticed you have a new POS system there. Oh, yeah. Everything's so much smaller. I keep making mistakes. Nobody asked the employee to maybe give it a go and give their feedback. It's like, this is what we're going to do, and you're going to enjoy it. And then they don't enjoy it, and then that has impact on the organization. What's the cost of that? So we look at that. But that's a couple areas that we consult with our clients. Like, build it into your KPIs. And I don't know if we'll get there, but I also want to talk, because Alie mentioned it earlier, what do we do next, right? And so we've integrated some tools, but that's really the big answer, the big question.
Yeah.
Where does it happen next?
Yeah.
And so we've had many email exchange, and she's actually implementing these things. It's like, how do I bring it to the forefront? She mentioned an icebreaker. Just 15 minutes of talking about your DISC styles and how it impacted you yesterday.
Yeah.
Will show the return on investment and get you that value proposition.
And I think that's the hardest thing. Yeah. What do we do next? And, I mean, it's all good theory, but and even these assessments, how do you do it? Like the practical real world implications. Let's go there next, but I do want to mention one KPI that shows up in my world a lot are the lawsuits. You mentioned that. And, we've seen it in certain organizations where certain lawsuits are coming out of one location because of a manager. And I've talked about it before, written some articles about it, the Steve Jobs effect, I call it, reading about how tough he was. He drove the results, but it was just a pain to work for him. And he called people out in front of the group and stuff. And I know that causes increased litigation because people are offended. They feel like they need to go and get back at them, even though it might not have been illegal. It's not illegal to be an a-hole in the world today, but
it's rarely helpful though, in situations like this.
And so I see that as a major KPI, and but that's kind of like the terminating KPI. Like once you got there, all of your costs, every cost from employee morale to employee turnover to customer retention, all that has already been expended. And now you've got this final cost, and there's like no benefit with that cost at all too. So it's almost too late at that point. But if you got to fix it, you got to fix it. You can see if there's a problem. But it's going to create a lot of ramifications before it shows up in my world.
Right. Yeah. That's one of the reasons why we've made such an effort to ensure that our team members align with our brand ethos. They have to live and breathe our mission and brand ethos in everything they do.
And how do you do that? How do you find out?
Well, what's interesting is that because I've been around for as long as I have, I had the opportunity to be a part of the development of our original vision, mission, and our core values at the time, which was a great process and a real collaborative process. And we realized, and again, following the pandemic, okay, we've got an opportunity here to kind of re-energize and refresh all of this. So what are we going to do? And as we were reviewing that, the process, those characteristics really that we should ideally align with, it was quite amazing because what we thought was going to be very difficult for us to put together ended up being let's just stop for a minute and recognize some of those really great performers on our team. What do they do? What are those characteristics that they have? So we developed our brand ethos with the idea that this is our team as they exist today. So as a part of the interview and hiring process, it's very important to talk about those things and to make sure that we're asking those behavioral-based questions that help us understand really, do these characteristics align with who you are and what's important to you based on your experience? So that can be very telling. You have to have the ability in hospitality, I think, in particular, to be hospitable, even when you are a very strong D and want to just be, extremely direct, and that the answer that you have provided is correct, and there's no reason to hear anybody else out. You may feel that way, but you have to have the ability and understanding and self-awareness to know that doesn't always work in every case.
Right. The easy said, harder done, right?
Yes,
but how do you get through an interview? Everybody's got their best persona on, and they're going to show up like I'm helpful, and I'm dedicated. how do you get through that? And yeah, do you have a process for that? Is it instinct? Is it a multi-day process?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we don't want to just hire people for the sake of hiring people, because it is a very specialized, experience that we're looking to provide to our team and to our guest, and to our leadership. So we have to make sure that we're bringing people on board that are in alignment with that. And that means that we're not just going through the motions and, okay, well, tell me about yourself. Right. And I'm looking here at your resume and you've been at XYZ. Okay, well, you've been there. So you must be qualified for the job. Mm-hmm. It's different. It's asking questions that give us a chance to get to know our team members a little bit better, and kind of going back to those basic and those fundamentals of even beginning to build that level of trust and respect from the very beginning. Okay. So from a tools perspective, we actually we leverage UKG for our HRIS system, and we have integrated another platform that serves as more of like the talent acquisition side of things. So it does include a little assessment. Mm-hmm. It does provide us with a gauge of, okay, so generally speaking, we know that in the population, for somebody who has to be who has to work in this type of environment, let's take the front desk, for example. You got to be really good at multitasking. Mm. You've got to be really good at handling difficult situations. You've got to be able to work through that challenge where somebody may be that person, like the one behind that machine. So you're talking through on a microphone, they don't even see you, and they're just berating you over the thing. We need to make sure that we're hiring people who have the ability to be successful in those challenging situations and to rise to the occasion. So the system that we use, in addition to providing us with that data and kind of where they stand in terms of, well, this is like based on the industry average, this is what you're probably looking for. Yeah. This is where this person is on one end or the other. And then it automatically generates, this is where some of the AI stuff comes into play. It automatically generates questions for us to ask, which are not necessarily like, okay, go to YouTube and these are the most commonly asked questions. We're going to prepare you for your interview, because a lot of people are well trained when it comes to going through the interview process. Right. But these questions are different. They provide or maybe they require a little more thought. Yeah. So instead of having the response because you're prepared and you've trained yourself on how to respond to these questions, it's, gosh, okay, well, let me think about that experience that I had, and it might not be positive per se, but how did I work through that, and how could I parlay some of what I did in that situation to be positive to the role that I'm applying for? Right. So it's really, we do leverage our systems and IT in some of those ways, because those tools that we get, they are very helpful to our hiring managers who may or may not be very seasoned in that role, because we do tend to hire people and give them the opportunity to grow into that next role without necessarily having the years and years of experience under their belt.
And it's even tough with the experience. There's a business author, Gary Vaynerchuk, that I listen to a lot. And he's like, look, I'm off the charts on EQ, but he's like, I still can't read people in an interview, even over a couple-day interview. And it's tough, even if you have a lot of experience. And I struggle with that. But
and that's exactly what I was going to piggyback off on, Alie. You know, I'm not a handyman. You put a skill saw in front of me, I know how it works. I ain't touching that thing. I don't know what I cut off an arm. So I need to have some training and education on how to use these tools effectively. So asking behavioral-based interview questions is a great place to start, because it can minimize some of your bias around a particular individual you're interviewing, but you still also have to learn how to interview without bias as well. Yeah. I had a conversation with a client once. It's like, you may have seen this video of how this orchestra is selecting members to the orchestra. Many first chairs in an orchestra are male. And they're like, we've got very talented individuals of all walks of life that should be in this. So they started doing blind auditions, right? Almost like The Voice, but they eventually they turn around on The Voice. So it's still not quite. But they started finding, when they were listening and they were just hearing the music, that more people who would not have been in those first chairs got an opportunity to be in those first chairs. Yeah. And so we have to eliminate that bias. Behavioral-based interviewing does that to a certain extent, but that interviewer has to understand that. And you stated something earlier, people know, they've studied, they prepared. My philosophy is what I'm seeing right now is the best it's ever going to be.
Yes.
Under the best circumstances. So I know we're going to have to drop it off a notch from what I'm seeing. And then do they still fit that ethos? Do they still fit in there? Because I know they're going to have bad days. And what they're telling me, you know, the behavioral-based questions get around because I was like, have you ever dealt with a bad customer? Yeah, how'd it go? Great. All right. Or tell me about a time when you dealt with a very difficult customer when you were really tired. What happened? And it's hard to make up stuff around that when you hit them with those types of questions. So those are really great tools. But the other thing is when you look at these tools, you still have to have that human component. You still have to have that connection because that assessment you take, we had this problem at my previous employer. Everybody was coming back red and the manager like, yeah, but they were really good people. So we had to coach them through that. Well, what made them good to you? And what should we look at this assessment? Because not everybody knows how to take an assessment very well either. We have a high English as a second language population. So when they take those things, they're doing the best they can, but sometimes their ratings are not that great. And so how do we navigate through that a little bit more? So that people component is still critical.
That's why those questions, those generated questions are so important because we're not going to make a hiring decision simply based on the result of that assessment.
Exactly.
That's just a small piece that we would take into consideration, but more so that we can better develop the relationship and ensure that we're asking the right questions. Because at the end of the day, we want to hire people that want to come and work for us. They want to work for a company like ours. So we're looking for that alignment. The results of that assessment are not necessarily going to give you that. So it's not as if it's a end all be all. Oh, you're strongest match. You must be perfect for the role. Not necessarily.
We like ranking people, and if you're first, you're the best candidate. Well, that's
that's where these
work.
interview questions. For me, it almost doesn't matter what the answer is. It's like how they're approaching it. And I thought that's where you're going to go, Alie, is like different questions that they're not prepared for to see how they react to it. And then it creates a bit of a stress, to your point earlier. What are they going to fall back on when they're stressed? What's the reaction?
So we want to create more positive tension. So positive tension being it's not necessarily, we don't want to come at it like we're trying to create some sort of gotcha moment.
Exactly.
It's not about that. In fact, it's opposite of that because that would be so weird. And it doesn't feel good for anybody to be a part of that kind of interaction. But if you're doing it in such a way because you want to learn and you want to understand and you are genuinely coming from a place of caring, even if they don't get the job, they'll still be like, oh my gosh, we have had that before where people are like, yeah, I'm applying again because you told me last time I met with you that while I didn't have the actual experience under my belt that I needed for this role, you felt like I had kind of what it takes to get onto that course and to gain that experience. And I got that experience and I'm ready to apply for that role. It's like the best feeling ever.
No, that's a good way to put it. And he can't come in and stress everybody out and want to have, a lot of people wanting to work for the company. One executive I've worked with, though, when he's hiring an executive for his company, he'll take them out to lunch. And he's gone as far as telling the waiter to mess up the order and to see how they respond.
Interesting.
We had a woman that was affiliated with Chart, one of the speakers. She's run a couple of very large brands, and that was her strategy. She would just take them out and see how they interacted with the staff. And if they were mean to the staff, they had no hopes of getting a job. I mean, that was her line in the sand. They may have done all the pre-interviews, but if they failed that test, it was not going to go well because of what they do for a living. So,
so maybe there's different tools out there, but you can't be taking everybody to lunch. But for the key people you're going to be working closely with, that might be something. And see them outside of the interview environment that everybody can prep for and be really well prepared.
And your point earlier about the Steve Jobs methodology, we're going through, the highest number of generations in the workforce that we've ever had, right? Now, people in my generation, I consider myself a Gen Xer, but I'm right on that line, Boomer, Gen Xer. We're retiring in the next 4 to 5 years, and there's a lot of us that are retiring. And so we have to be cognizant of that, and each generation expects something different. So when I came up through the rank, I would just take it, The following generations, they're like, we're not going to do that. And I just heard a stat that our employment relationships, and you may know this more than anybody, is become more transactional. That people will leave a job for $1,000 and go someplace they don't even know. They at least know their current employer and they can manage to do that, but they're going to go there for $1,000. When I was running restaurants, they would go across the street for 25 cents an hour. And I'm like, have you thought, the grass is not always greener on the other side, so make sure you do. And if that's a better place for you, then great. I want you to flourish. But do your due diligence before you just quickly. And then, by the way, tell me why is it that you're looking so that I can maybe address that. But that was a learned behavior over many years in management. I wasn't always there. But I think that's the key thing that leaders have to realize, like, the workforce is changing. What you're used to may not be what they need. And there's a lot of competition out there because the population of the workforce has gotten smaller. And I think the last thing I'll make on this is, I don't know about anybody in this room, but as a result of COVID, I reassessed in my world what was important. And that's leading to people making different decisions about where they're going to spend half their week, maybe a little bit more. It's like, life's too short for me to spend it with you people. So I'm going to go down here and look for better people. So I think that's a key.
Yeah, and that's great. And, not everybody, there's no value it's, to say, well, I'm going to be this high-level executive working 80 hours a week versus I only want to work 20 or 30 hours a week and be able to spend time with my family and play softball and stuff. Like, it's a personality. It comes down to what you want and what you're happy doing.
Exactly.
And if you're trying to be something you're not going to be successful at it. So, that's key. We do have the election coming up 5 days from now, and I hesitate to bring up politics, and I'm not going to get into politics, but just managing, and we're having this question a lot. I was actually on a webinar yesterday, like, how do you, more on the legal side, what can people discuss in the workplace and all of this? And we're seeing that come up, but we were talking about it a little bit before the podcast. The media seems to really pit everybody against each other and trying to create this tension. But my instinct is when you get out to the real world, it's not necessarily that contentious, and people are very accommodating with other people's views. And there's some outliers on that. But I think for the most part, though, across America, everybody seems to be working along together pretty well. But it comes up in the workplace a lot. And, any key insights on that, like the conflict between people and views. And it just seems like, and even without the election around the corner, just a continual barrage from the media on all these different issues. And it's like, especially after COVID and then it's been nonstop.
Yeah. Gosh, it's, at the end of the day, we do not want people to have discussions, our team members to have discussions about a few things. Politics is one of them. Where there are just certain topics that are not appropriate for the workplace because they're very personal.
It's going to just lead to disruption.
And so, so we have a pretty firm policy on that's not appropriate to discuss here at work. You are welcome to do whatever you want outside of work. But at the end of the day, we want our team to be respectful of one another. And while you might not agree, we're not going to tolerate people having arguments or debates about those things in the workplace. Now, it's interesting because in the hospitality industry, we can't control guests that are walking into the front door, and our guests may be very opinionated. So going back some time, because this isn't new. This is something that we've had, to work through for decades upon decades. But if somebody were to approach the front desk to say, hey, what do you think about whatever? We literally train them to be like, well, that's politics. Can I help you with something else? So we're going to divert the conversation so we bring it back to business. We don't ever want to, encourage people to agree with what people are saying, to disagree with what people are saying. We're basically saying you want to remain neutral during those
even
situations.
Outside of politics, though, like those conflicts, and you talked about it earlier too, how to, when things go sideways, like the how to resolve these issues. So you're actively training the staff, then I presume, on how to deal with that.
Training and development, it's so interesting to me because having the partnership that I've had with the Council of Hotel and Restaurant Trainers over all of these many years, I have seen for myself that the restaurant industry has a different take on training and development than the hospitality industry, generally speaking. And I think that our position, as a company from a training and development standpoint has always been, gosh, you know what, we're people. We're in hospitality. So we have to have the ability to have conversations. So for us, for more years than I can remember, we have facilitated in-person workshops or regional workshops that encourage our team members to role play with one another and to practice. How, if somebody says X, what's your response going to be? Or even integrating a little bit of like, okay, let's have a little game where teams are going to play against each other. What's the best response to this scenario right in front of you? But to help people be prepared for those scenarios because it's inevitable. It is going to come up. It's how you respond versus reacting to the situation that makes a difference.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Alie got some advice from her mom, and I remember one from my mom. We don't talk politics or religion in this family. And I'm like, okay, I'll take that as a good bit of advice. But I'll bring it kind of full circle a little bit to your point about, sometimes you've got, frontline staff, they're involved in something, that's where the manager needs to step in and support them. It's like, I'm not going to leave you hanging out there on a vine. I will take on this role. And that's why them knowing more about themselves is very helpful so that they can manage through that conversation as a result of what they've learned about themselves. Because the moment you get in that difficult situation, that's where you have to take that pause, as Alie mentioned. And that also significantly impacts the employee-manager relationship. If that manager comes in and supports that employee in that moment, that employee is going to look much differently at that manager in that moment. I've been in that situation where I've been left to hang out to dry and try to figure it out, and then it's negative for everybody. And then I looked at that person like, you're not on my side. So
that's a key point.
There's those connections.
When we've done training for managers, I remind them they're paid to get into these problems. And they're going to happen, to your point, Alie, and it's going to come up. You need to be ready and trained how to deal with it. And then some experience really helps.
And integrating, and this is the kind of the big ta-da for me is to answer your question earlier. Well, what's next? How do I make this work every day? And my conversation with clients is, what programs do you already have in place? Do you have individual development plan programs? Great. You have a tool here that you can use that gives this employee 3 suggested ways they can be a better employee. Integrate that into the system that you already have. If you're doing conflict management workshops, have a little discussion around their style and say, when you get into heated situation, how is your D style going to impact how you interact with this client versus this person over here's S style? So I truly try to tell people this is not new additional things. You're already busy enough. You're overwhelmed 2 times a week. How do we build it into what you're already doing? Oh, guess what? Curt and Alie are having a little kerfuffle. You know what? I'm the HR person. Let's sit down with them and see what's at the cause of this. Well, Allie's an I style, which sometimes irritates Curt, who's the C style. Weirdly enough, 90% of the time you find that what Allie's saying and what Curt's saying are exactly the same thing. We're just coming at it from a different angle. So you build that into what's already happening. And it helps the leader because they don't have to choose sides. I mean, I have kids, but they're older. But it was tough when one of them would come to me and say, she's doing this. And I'd like, if I have to step in between these 2 folks right now, it's not going to be good for either one of you. So I encourage you to work together on this and then bring me in to help guide you if you need support. That's what we got to do with our employees and with our managers. So
that's awesome.
But it takes effort because guess what? Alie, do you have a lot of stuff on your plate?
I do.
She's got a lot of stuff on her plate. So this is one of those things that takes time. But you have to kind of say, if I don't do this now, what's it going to cost me down the road?
More time.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would add is, I could remind as it relates to training and development and integrating something like the DISC model to help grow and develop that skill set. These are all portable skills. You take what you learn here and you apply it to every other facet of your life.
Right.
So everything that I've done up to this point, has also been really beneficial from a personal standpoint and with my family. So if I am, I mean, there's no doubt a period of time. I remember either my husband or my daughter saying to me, I feel like you are so much nicer to the people that you work with. And I'm like, oh. So it's about, when we talk about self-awareness and wanting to be the best version of yourself, it's all the way around. It's beneficial in the workplace. It's beneficial outside of the workplace. And then it also, encourages you to kind of get out of your comfort zone and to get involved into other organizations. Like we have the opportunity, Anthony, to sit on the board for the California Restaurant Foundation together. So to do even more, to give back. It's, this growing and developing this skill set, I think when a company makes the decision to invest in that and to take it seriously and to really roll with it, great things can happen in and out of work.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. What a great note to conclude it on.
Yeah.
It does carry over, just looking beyond the professional, how it impacts your private life, family, and we could have a whole nother hour on that.
I know.
But this was awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming in.
Thank you.
And really appreciate your time. And I know you're both busy, but it was awesome coming in. If anybody wants to reach you both, what's the best way for them to reach out to you? Are you on social media? What's the best? Yeah,
so I have my LinkedIn account, but direct is just through my email, Curt, CURT, at ppstrat.com. Easy way to go. We also have our people and performance page that you can go in. Info at ppstrat is another way that you can reach us. But
Great.
Great. Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn as well and can be reached at Alie Gaffan at pacificahotels.com.
Great. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Anthony.
Really appreciate the opportunity. This is great.
Awesome. Thanks.